In the 1700s, a man named Jean is locked in a prison cell, waiting for a terrible punishment. Suddenly, the guards come in and drag him out in front of an angry crowd. They all shout for justice as a nobleman announces Jean's fate.
The court is that in 2 days hence, the perfumer journeyman, Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, shall be bound to a wooden cross with his face raised toward heaven.
It all began in a dirty, smelly market. A woman working at a stall suddenly goes into labor and gives birth right there. Since all her other babies had died at birth, she thinks this one is dead too. She quickly cuts the cord and throws the baby into a pile of fish guts before going back to work. But this baby, Jean, takes his first breath and starts crying. The people nearby hear him and accuse the woman of trying to kill her child. She tries to run away but is caught and executed. Jean is sent to a crowded orphanage run by a woman named Madame Gallard. The orphanage is cramped, and the kids have to sleep in piles because there isn't enough room. When Jean is put with them, the other kids feel something strange about him. One boy pokes him, but Jean grabs his finger and sniffs it, scaring the other kids. Afraid of him, they try to smother Jean with a pillow. Jean cries loudly, and Madame Gallard comes in to stop them and punishes the kids. By the time Jean is 5, he still doesn't talk. Instead, he uses his extraordinary sense of smell to explore the world. He can smell the tiniest scents and knows what something is just by sniffing it, like fresh bread or rotting animals. His odd behavior makes the other kids tease him. Eventually, Jean learns to talk and gets so good at smelling things that he can identify them while blindfolded. When Jean turns 13, Madame Gallard sells him to a man named Grimel, who runs a tannery. She takes the money but is robbed and killed on her way home. Years later, Grimel takes Jean to the city for work. Jean is amazed by the busy streets and all the new smells around him, some good, some bad. While Grimel is busy, Jean's nose leads him to a perfume shop selling a scent called Amour and Psyche. Watching the perfumer work, Jean realizes that smells can be mixed to create something completely new. Suddenly, Jean smells something incredible. He follows the scent to a red-haired woman selling plums. The smell is unlike anything he's ever known. Mesmerized, he trails her through the streets, getting close enough to smell her shoulder. The woman notices him and offers him a plum, but Jean doesn't say anything. Instead, he smells her hand. Frightened, the woman runs away, but Jean follows her scent. He finds her sitting alone and sneaks up to smell her again. She screams when she sees him, covers her mouth, and drags her into the shadows. When a couple passes by, Jean stays silent until they leave. He lets go of her, only to realize that she has stopped breathing. In his obsession with her scent, Jean unintentionally suffocates her. Devastated, Jean tries to preserve the woman's scent by removing her clothes and smelling her body. However, her scent fades, leaving him heartbroken. That night, Grimel beats Jean for running off, but Jean doesn't care. He is consumed by thoughts of the woman's scent and vows to find a way to preserve it forever. Around this time, a perfumer named Giuseppe is struggling to regain his fame, overshadowed by the popular Amour and Psyche perfume. Jean, confident in his abilities, visits Giuseppe's shop and quickly identifies what's missing in the perfume. He offers his help, and after proving himself by creating a perfect copy of Amour and Psyche, Giuseppe, astonished, buys Jean from Grimel. As Jean becomes Giuseppe's apprentice, he creates groundbreaking perfumes, but his obsession with scent continues to grow. Giuseppe teaches him about the 12 basic smells used in perfume making and shares a story about a 13th, magical scent that could make a perfume perfect. Jean becomes consumed with this idea and remembers the red-haired woman he killed. He dreams of her often and is determined to capture the perfect scent, starting with roses. Giuseppe shows Jean how to extract scents from flowers, and Jean begins experimenting with his own method. However, he becomes frustrated when he tries to capture scents from inanimate objects like metal or his cat, only to be told by Giuseppe that such scents cannot be captured. One day, Giuseppe, worried about Jean's obsession, tells him about a method used in Grasse to capture scents called enfleurage. Jean, inspired, decides to travel to Grasse to learn more. Giuseppe gives him travel papers in exchange for 100 perfume recipes. Shortly after Jean leaves, Giuseppe dies unexpectedly, leaving Jean to continue his journey alone. As Jean makes his way through the countryside, he stumbles upon a cave and, for the first time in his life, experiences peace by being surrounded by the neutral scent of stone. He spends years in the cave, but dreams of the red-haired woman continue to haunt him. Jean eventually leaves the cave and makes his way to Grasse, where he is immediately struck by the fresh air and beautiful countryside. In the town, he becomes fixated on a young woman named Laura, whose scent is so captivating it surpasses that of the red-haired woman. Jean begins to follow Laura, watching her from a distance, and his obsession grows. He eventually secures a job at a perfume shop owned by Drouot, where he learns the enfleurage technique. However, Jean is consumed by his need to capture the scent of pure women. He begins killing them to preserve their fragrances. Jean's first victim is a young girl in a barn. He covers her body with animal fat, trying to capture her scent, but his method doesn't work. Determined, he hires a street worker to help him. Instead of doing as requested, Jean smothers her with fat. When she tries to escape, Jean kills her and successfully extracts her scent. With this success, Jean begins to collect the scents of his victims, storing them in bottles. Meanwhile, Jean becomes more obsessed with Laura. He sneaks into her birthday party and watches her from the garden, but a game of hide-and-seek causes her to run away from him. In a fit of jealousy, Jean throws a rock at a lamp, startling Laura. Later, when two girls go missing, the town becomes terrified and suspects a killer targeting innocent women. Despite increased patrols, Jean continues his murders. Drouot eventually confronts Jean, but when he smells Jean's incredible perfume, his anger fades. Meanwhile, the town holds meetings to discuss the killings. Rick, Laura's father, suggests a curfew, but the council refuses, fearing it will hurt business. Jean continues his killings, leaving the bodies of his victims in random places. The townspeople become increasingly suspicious and terrified. Even a nun falls victim to Jean, and the bishop calls the killer a demon during a mass. When a man is arrested and confesses to the murders, the townspeople execute him to close the case. However, Jean, still obsessed with creating the perfect perfume, mixes the 12 scents he has collected. He realizes that his perfume is incomplete. He still needs Laura's scent. Jean tracks Laura down, sneaks into her mansion, and prepares to kill her. But when her father, Rick, wakes up and notices the open window, he decides to flee with Laura the next morning. Rick sets a trap for Jean, sending an empty carriage in one direction, while he and Laura travel by horse. Jean follows Laura's fading scent, determined to complete his perfume. Meanwhile, Drouot uncovers the clothing and hair of all Jean's victims, exposing his crimes. Rick, and Laura arrive at a remote inn, where they lock Laura in a windowless room for safety. However, Jean sneaks in, steals the key, and enters Laura's room. Just as he's about to kill her, Laura opens her eyes, and Jean hesitates. The next morning, Rick finds Laura dead. Jean has completed his perfume, using Laura's scent as the final note. He is arrested, but before he is executed, he dabs his perfume on himself. The scent overwhelms the crowd, causing them to fall to their knees in awe. Even the executioner refuses to kill him. Jean, waving a perfume-soaked handkerchief, spreads the scent further. The entire crowd enters a trance, with people calling him an angel and the bishop declaring him divine. Jean realizes, however, that he has never felt true love and is heartbroken. Rick, unable to resist, kneels before Jean, calling him his son. Later, the townspeople awaken, ashamed of their actions, and realize Jean is gone. Drouot is blamed for the murders and confesses under torture. Disillusioned, Jean returns to his hometown. He pours the entire bottle of perfume over himself, attracting a crowd. In their frenzy, the people tear him apart and devour him. By morning, nothing remains of Jean except his clothes and a single drop of perfume.